This also I saw that it was from the hand of God. The wise man saying, this isn't just my idea, this is God's idea. Remember what Sister Barbara, I believe it's Sister Barbara and Brother Tim said, that was success. Success is doing most of the time what you do best. Spending most of your time doing what you do best. That's success. You can make $1 billion, but if you're miserable, if you hate what you're doing, what's the big deal? All right. So what do I mean by this? Use your uniqueness. What is your uniqueness? It's what you do. To make a big deal out of God. That's why you do it. What you do and why you do. Every day of your life, that's where you do it. So you got to get to all these elements. You got to, what you do, all of us have something that we're doing. Is what you do match with, is there a good why you do it behind it? And do you enjoy what you do? Or do you hate every second of it? Every day of your life, while you're doing the three things, using your everyday life, using your God-given strengths to give God the glory, while you're doing them, what happens? You find your sweet spot. Let me give you an example from history. There was a very famous man, George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver lived in a less than perfect environment. He was a black man in a white man's world. But he was someone that decided not to let his circumstances dictate. After the Civil War, after a century, 100 years of cotton crops, just planting the same cotton, the ground had been totally sucked dry of nutrients. And the farmers, the crops, they had scrawny crops that was making no production, no produce. George Washington Carver offered a solution. He told them that if they would change the crops and plant crops that were legumes. I don't know if this means anything to you, but I studied this in high school. They are certain crops that put nitrogen back into the soil. There's such a thing as called crop rotation. Guess where that originated from? The Bible. God had Israel doing this a few thousand years ago. They would lay aside every the seventh year. You let the ground itself. And it was a replenishing. But they weren't doing that. Everybody's greedy. They're trying to get as much. Well, then the soil wasn't producing anything. So Carver said, grow sweet potatoes or soybeans. Thank God for soybeans. Oh, you don't like tofu? Okay. Or most of all, he suggested raising peanuts. But nobody paid any attention. But then in 1915, they had an epidemic of the boll weevil. That's a little bug that attacks the cotton plant and totally destroys the cotton plant, the cotton. When it's, before it blooms and opens, they get in there and eat and mess the thing up. They had a huge epidemic of boll weevil. Totally decimated the cotton crop. Everybody's going, and George Washington Carver said, opportunity knocking. Now maybe they'll listen to me. So with every disaster, someone is looking at it as a disaster, but somebody's looking at it as an opportunity. So George Washington Carver convinced some of them to plant. He told them to burn off their infested cotton, to destroy the weevils, and then to plant peanuts. So some of them believed him. And they raised the peanuts. But guess what? Nobody wanted to buy them. Because peanut butter had not been invented yet. So they got barns full of peanuts. And they're going, this is what I thought. Listen to dumb George Washington Carver. He said raise peanuts. So great, we raise peanuts, but if you can't sell them, what's the big deal? So the peanuts was in the barn. Some were rotting in the field because there was no market. So when George Washington Carver was writing about this, he recounted how that he went to his favorite prayer spot. George Washington Carver was a devout Christian. He was a great believer in God. He had a prayer spot in the woods where he would go to pray. And George Washington Carver basically went and he said, okay, God, what's the big deal? I did what you asked me to do, and now I'm in trouble. You remember anybody else that did that? You remember a man named Moses? They went and told the children of Israel, I'm going to go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And after he did a couple of his tricks, remember what happened? Pharaoh called him in and said, so y'all got plenty of time to dilly-dally around, so here, no more, we'll provide the straw, and you still got to make the same number of bricks. They came back and said, Moses, you're killing us, you're not helping us. That's basically what the people were telling George Washington Carver. So he goes into intercessory prayer, and this is what is recorded. He called God, he said, Mr. Creator, why did you make the universe? The Creator answered, you want to know too much for that little pea brain of yours. Ask me something more your size. Okay, Mr. Creator, tell me what man was made for. Again, God spoke to him, little man, you're still asking for more than you can handle. Cut down the extent of your request and improve the intent. Shrink your extent, but improve your intent. He thought about it a few months. He said, okay, Mr. Creator, why did you make the peanut? And God's like, now we're getting somewhere. He said, God put a handful of peanuts, and he went back to the laboratory, and together him and God got down to work. If you read about the uses of peanuts today, you can trace almost all of them to George Washington Carver. In less than 5 years, working day and night, Carver tore apart the peanut. What? Using his God-given abilities. He was a good chemist. He was good in the laboratory. He was a good scientist. And he began examining the oil from the peanut. He began examining the peanut, and he began experimenting with doing it different ways, grinding it, making peanut butter. And he unlocked the chemical magic that would turn loss into profit. In less than 5 years, peanut production turned his Alabama county. America is divided in states, and then the states are divided into counties. His county became the most prosperous in Alabama because of his insight into how to make the peanut useful. He found out that they thought that lard was good to cook with. The fat from a pig. He found out that peanut oil had one of the highest heat temperatures. If you want to cook fried fish, the best oil in the world to cook fried fish in is peanut oil. Guess who found that out? Carver. During his lifetime, he extracted more than 300 products from the peanut. God said, you're not smart enough for me to tell you about the universe, George Washington Carver, but you are smart enough for me to tell you about the peanut. Do what you can do best, George Washington Carver. Take the peanut, get in the laboratory, get to work. That's finding your sweet spot. So you see,